Hey guys, Drifter here. Sorry it's been so long since the last Ghost Stories episode. I've been very busy. I got married on October 15th. Me and my now wife, we planned this ourselves. We paid for it ourselves. We didn't have a wedding planner. We didn't have a dedicated person to help. Her family pitched in. Our caterer pitched in. It was a great wedding. We're going to have pictures and video, and I'm going to do wedding commentary pretty soon. As per the request from Twitter, I told her that her dress looked very MLG when I saw her on wedding day. She thought it was funny. Well, that's a good sign that she's got a good sense of humor. She's going to be a good wife. But I knew all that stuff ahead of time. This is a Ghost Stories episode. Let's not talk about wedding. Wedding is a different video for a different day. In the last video, a lot of you offered me some, or not offered, you very bluntly gave me some criticism saying that this was fake, that I make stories up, that I'm preying on emotions and things like that, and that's just not true. Everything that I tell you here is real. It happened. I'm recanting things from the absolute best of my memory. The way that I'm telling it, I'm attempting to tell it in a slightly more dramatic or suspenseful manner other than this happened, that happened, that happened, then this happened, but the events are entirely real as best as I can remember them. It's been, around a decade since a lot of these stories happened. But the most legitimate thing that I can offer right now in the way of proof, ooh, had a frog in my voice there, is a link to my old haunted house here in Harrodsburg, Kentucky. It's really in between Harrodsburg and Cornishville, Kentucky. It's right off of Cornishville Road, which kind of connects the two. It's a Google Map satellite picture, and for some reason the Street View car went by. So if you look on the, if you look at the picture, what's going to be on the left side of the picture or the right side of your Street View screen of the house, you will see a fence made out of old cut down trees, like a little wooden fence. I built that fence. I cut those trees down and I made it with the help of my stepfather and uncle. I busted my ass for that fence, and I gotta tell you, it made the property look a lot shittier when we were done. Let's get to the ghost story part of this commentary. This house was fucked in every way a house can be fucked. I talked about it in the last episode. The whole neighborhood, there was something wrong about it. We had these Quaker walls going on through the woods that were, I don't know, remnants of Quakers. There was supposedly a slave cemetery on the house. Supposedly a baby died in the house. My family at the time was very toxic, attempting to kill each other, overdosing on, just drinking too much. Drugs were involved. Drug trade was involved. It was a very hostile home environment, but there were whole other levels of crazy going on in this house. This house, when you went in there, you always felt like something was watching you, which was bad, but there were these weird little noises that we could never explain. There was these little knocking noises. It would almost always be at night. Sometimes it would just be a knock at a door, and you'd answer the door, and not anybody would be there, and that sounds stupid. That sounds like a childish complaint, but if you look on this Google map, there are not very many people within a mile or two of us, and all of these people around us, these are old people, these are retirees, these aren't teenagers. It's not like if you ding-dong ditch, there is nowhere to run to, so that it would be unusual but possible, but it would be annoying because you would hear a knock at the door and you'd answer the door and there'd be nobody there. Okay, we got people ding dong ditching, and then you'd hear a knock at the door and be like, you little sons of bitches, and you'd go back to open the door, and then you'd hear a knock in the ceiling directly above your head. I'm like, what in the fuck is going on? You look up at the ceiling and there'd just be knocking continue all the way through the ceiling, through the walls, and usually go up into the attic, and you kind of assume just out of the house and out. Every now and then something would start in the attic and just kind of knock about, knock down through the walls, knock on the stairs, and just knock everywhere. It's kind of like something was making a path through the house. You're going to want to say rodent or a block in the pipes, but it was very distinct, very loud, and seemingly purposeful. The example with the door wasn't the only one. It would be all the time you would hear the knock, and you'd be like, oh, well, what's that? And you'd walk over there, and about the time you'd get there, I was like, I don't see anything, and then the knock would come directly from behind you, and you turn around, and then the knock would come from some other direction that you're not looking. It was very malevolent feeling, like something was watching you, and it knew which direction you were looking, and the knock would always come from somewhere else, somewhere where you're just not expecting it, not wanting it to be, directly above your head, below your feet. There's something very creepy about it, and it continued for a very long time. It just it wasn't a secret. My stepdad, he was an old hard ass. He not the nicest guy in the world. He served in Vietnam. He was not easily spooked. He didn't buy into this bullshit too much, but it really started wearing on him over time. He really started to not like this at all. The next little bit I'd like to tell you is that the most extreme so-called knock I've ever heard in my entire life. I hope you guys please tell me if you have a good explanation for this one, because I'd like to hear it. There was an explosion in our house, an auditory sound explosion, but nothing was damaged. In this house, there were 2 rooms for children, identical, side by side. It was one for me and one for my little brother. He was in bed. I was getting into bed. And the wall between our rooms was pretty thin. I don't think there was anything important in there. And I kid you not when I say there was an explosion in between those 2 walls. Just a loud crash, a bang. And for those of you that are familiar with firearms and how loud they can be, it sounded like somebody took a double-barrel shotgun and pulled both triggers at once and just blew both barrels. Went kaboom! Right there in the wall, echoing through the house. Super, super fucking loud. I jumped so badly. I had a bunk bed in my room that I hit my head on the top of the bunk bed and I just rolled out of the room in a panic. I thought somebody was in the house shooting. I didn't know what was going on. My little brother, who was an infant at the time, woke up in the other room and he was screaming and he was crying. My mother has a post-traumatic stress syndrome. She thought she was being shot at in the kitchen. She dropped and covered and then started like crawling and poking around. When she heard my little brother crying, she came running out. My grandmother, who was down in the basement, I don't know what she was making herself. She was cooking something. We had a small kitchen in the basement. It was a very rich, kind of wealthy house. You can see from the pictures there, it's not small. It's actually built inside the hill a little bit. She managed to drop a carton of milk, and she thought there was a gun in the house. She ran upstairs to see what was going on. My stepfather at the time, he was a little bit older, and he just suffered from a stroke, but he still had his hard-ass mentality. He was laying in bed trying to go to sleep, and it scared him so bad that he shit himself. This old, hard-natured, hard-ass guy shit in his pants. So he just kicked his shitty pants off, and he stumbled and bumbled out of the bed, tried to get the gun out of the closet. He kept a gun, even though my mom hated it because of the not liking guns and post-traumatic stress syndrome. And by the time my mother got upstairs to check on him, he was busy trying to load his rifle with bullets that had been misplaced, and they were bitching about it. He thought somebody was in the house, and she didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. Nobody knew what was going on. It's a very big house. You could hear it everywhere. The next day we had plumbers come. We had people check. I was at school. I didn't see any of this. My mother told me that they didn't find anything abnormal in the wall, which is very concerning because it was one of the louder noises that I've heard in my life, right next to car crashes and some guns and explosions going off. It scared the fuck out of us. We don't know what happened there. Very creepy. And probably the creepiest story about this house was what I would call Indian drums in the forest. And no, I'm not ignorant. Yes, I know that there are no Indians anywhere near this territory. We should say perhaps tribal drums would be more appropriate, but Indian drums really rolls off the tongue a lot smoother for me, so that's how we're going with it. My mom was a night owl. I was a night owl too, but at a younger age it wasn't such a big deal. She was always up very, very late at night, every night, and she would complain that in the woods, where if you look at the Google Maps here, what you'll see is that the left, if you're looking from the satellite view, the left side of our house actually has a porch, like an open porch you can walk out onto. It's 1 story off the ground, the bottom part being the lower part of the hill where the house is built into. And over off to the left, you see this little man-made pond and this bald patch of woods. That was, I don't know when this satellite picture was taken, but I don't know if it was before or after, but when I was there, there was actually a lot of trees there, so that was a little bit thicker. And we would hear drums in the middle of the night coming from that area, and it wasn't our neighbor either, because it was right there. For the light of the house, you could see right to about that first little tree line that you can see that doesn't continue. That's about where the trees, they just kind of went all the way down from that first line by the label that says Cornishville Road there. And that's where the sound would come from. It would come from just beyond the veil of darkness. But anyway, my mother was the only one that would hear this because she was up late at night. The rest of us went to bed early, or I went to bed fairly early, and she would tell us, 2, 3, 3:30 every night that this would happen. Almost every night. Very rarely was there a night where there were no Indian drums going on. My stepdad, you're crazy, you've been drinking too much. I'd say, Mom, I can't hear them. I don't know, maybe you're imagining things. Some of her aunts claimed to have heard these noises on the phone. I didn't buy it. It was all bullshit. And I think it was one Thursday or Friday, I called my mom out on it. And she's like, you know what, I'm sick of listening to you, Brad. I'm not going to let you tell me that I'm hearing things. You stay up and you listen and you tell me. And I stayed up most of that night with my mom, and we were watching movies. And sure enough, in the middle of watching a movie, and about 2 or 3 in the morning, I started hearing these little kind of conga primitive tribal drums coming on from out in the forest. I'm like, now what in the fuck is going on here? And I walk outside and open the door to the patio, and the sound gets much, much louder as it's now not being blocked by the windows and the glass in the house. And I walk out there, and sure as shit, there's Indian drums coming from the little patch of trees out there. Not like it's a huge patch of trees, not like there's more than maybe 10 or 15 people in this whole area that could possibly go over there in a reasonable amount of time. And they just sat there and played for about 15 or 20 minutes, some little tribal beat, and they stopped. And that was it. And I would like to say that there's not really a reasonable way for people to get over to that patch of land. There's not a lot of roads going on. To navigate these woods at night, I mean, it's dark as fuck out here. This is not the city. You can see by the stars pretty well, yeah, but when you get into these thick patches of trees, it's not so hot seeing out from under them. You really need flashlights. You need a gator. If you're carrying any musical equipment out there, you're going to need some sort of mule or horse or fucking something, man. Some little ATV or four-wheeler that makes noise. Drum stop, we sit there and listen for an hour. We don't hear a soul. We don't hear anybody stamping around, anybody move. And after this, I got curious. I started staying up later without my mom knowing. And sure as hell, just about every night, now not every single night, but I'd say every other night, there would be Indian drums beating out in the forest right there in that little, what is on the Google Maps a bald patch, but it used to be a patch of trees. And there was never any. I could sit on the patio and wait and listen, and nobody would come for miles. And then the drums would just start, and they'd just start playing, doing their drum thing for 20, 30 minutes, 2, 3 in the morning. And then they'd stop, and I'd wait for hours. Nobody would leave. It's not like there's a lot of place for them to hide there, and it was really, really bothersome. So I quit. I just quit trying to pay attention to it. Of all the problems in the house, drums in the forest was, believe it or not, a surprisingly small one. And that was pretty creepy. That mentally affected me as a child. You might say I'm weak-minded. It sounds like a simple story, but when you're there on the ground and there's drums playing just barely beyond the veil of darkness for no reason, it creeps you the fuck out. There's something wrong. I mean, really, really wrong. Now, I will add an additional chapter to this story. At the time, my aunts and uncles were trying to make my mother look crazy so that they could... it was expected that my stepfather would die and that my mother would be unfit mentally to take care of my little brother, he's my half-brother, of that man on her own, and that they could perhaps gain some access to his trust fund. So it would have been in their interest for my mother to be perceived as totally crazy. And many, many years later, we're talking 5, 6, 7 years later, come to find out my uncle actually had this really big set of like Indian conga primal tribal drums, like kind of like it would make similar noises to what I heard in the woods. But this, I saw these things 5, 6 years later, I would say, after we moved away. And I would like to think that it was him out there in the forest just beating on these things, trying to make my mom think it was a ghost and drive her crazy. But the reason that makes me say that it's not him is that it's so fucking hard to get out there without being noticed, with using no lights, making no noise, coming in and out. We'd always check the woods in the daytime. We wouldn't really find anything. Nobody had the balls to go out there at night. Stepdad was never awake. My mom and I were like, fuck that. And if it was him, he is way, way stealthier than a 250-pound fat guy should be out in the woods. I mean, if he was able to sneak a huge pair of conga drums out here in the dead of night and then sneak them out every single day while leaving no trace in the woods, not using a flashlight, not being able to be seen by me, then he deserves some credit for the effort. I'm going to say that's possible. In all honesty, that's the most probable thing, because it's not very sane or realistic or pragmatic to go around blaming things on ghosts. But I really just don't understand what was going on out there. And there was one other thing that happened in this house. God, I don't like to think about that. It's only fair from telling stories that I tell the whole entire story, but I'm gonna save that last little snippet for next episode, because it's pretty disturbing and almost warrants its own entire episode. I've only told a very few people this before. The reactions I got were not pleasant, so I'll toss it out on the entire internet next episode of Ghost Stories. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you've got something to say, if you've got any insight as into what in the fuck was going on out there, please let me know in the comments. Drifter out.